Hello, and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society podcast, where we're ticking all the boxes. I'm Matty.
And I'm Josh,
I lead the film discussions.
and I lead the music discussions.
So we got a great episode for you all today. One of our films, not so much, not so grey, but the headliner for the episode. Oh boy, are we getting into some grey realism here? So of course, the two movies we're talking about this episode are I, Daniel Blake from Ken Loach and Only You, which is the new film, and I, Daniel Blake is obviously the old film. Um, and I'm switching up today. Normally we talk about the old film second, but seeing as I've decided, as the leader of the film discussions, that we'll be discussing I, Daniel Blake for the bulk of the episode, I thought we should put it first. So we put all of our amazing internet brain, film brain energy into it. Josh, how do you feel about this change?
That's totally fine. I mean, it's headlining, right? It's like Coachella, but sad movies. So
Exactly, exactly. We, the Minority Arts Appreciation Society, is now renamed Coachella for sad movies, which is actually more catchy than our current name anyway.
I think that's just the palm. What's it called? The palm to Paul. What's
Palm
the
d'Or.
palm door? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, that took you so many attempts. That was amazing. Yes, yeah. So I Daniel Blake, yeah, won the Palme d'Or, in 2016, I think it was. Um,
It's actually the oldest director to have won a Palme d'Or award.
really, that's
Yeah,
so cool. Yeah,
so
Ken
it's
Loach is
super old
getting
when
it
he
on. He's
made
been
it.
making movies for so long. I
Yeah.
didn't realize. So yeah, to formally start our I Daniel Blake discussion, just give it a bit of an introduction. So Ken Loach is a realist director. He's English and he mainly focuses on political topics when he makes his films. Now I know what you're thinking, a lot of you out there, but wait, shouldn't everything be apolitical that isn't politics? And I know, but luckily we let Ken Loach off for this one, guys. You know, he's allowed to talk about politics. Um, so yeah, it's a very explicitly political film, as many of his films are, and a very explicitly left wing film, as all of his films are. I mean, like his documentary Spirit of 45 is explicitly about British socialism. British socialism. God, that's hard to say. After the Second World War, he also has films on the topic of Irish nationalism. He covers a lot, but all of it with an incredibly grounded and realistic tone. Essentially, his films do feel like documentaries, even when they're not. And that is one of his incredible strengths as a director. They are so incredibly real, incredibly grounded, without just being simply boring. It's kind of amazing, even if you're not into the political commentary, to just see how incredibly well realized his worlds are that he creates as reminiscent of our world. Um, so I, Daniel Blake, the film we're discussing today, is set contemporarily. It's set in 2016, after 5 years or so of a Tory majority government, which has made austerity sweep throughout the nation, um, and essentially limited welfare access for many people. And the protagonist, Daniel Blake, is one of these people. He finds himself out. He finds himself unable to work due to a heart attack while working as a carpenter. And this film is essentially about his struggle to obtain sufficient compensation for being out of work. Just to talk about the nature of English politics in this time, it's quite similar now, except we have the added shitstorm that is Brexit on top of it. This film was made, I believe, before the referendum, and there is very little. I believe there's no mention of anything to do with the European Union or Brexit, which is kind of refreshing. If we talk so much about it nowadays, it's just refreshing to see the issues that working class people face um, without the lens of Brexit for once. The English working class has been decimated by years of austerity, which leaves pretty much everyone without access to anything they might need in times of need. And it's obviously a ripe situation for someone with a socialist lens to tackle. So, with that quite lengthy introduction out of the way, which I hope was fairly coherent, we should get into our thoughts on the film itself. Josh, I'll start with you. What did you think of this film?
So I don't think I have any history with Ken Loach. Yeah, no, I've this is my first Ken Loach film.
Okay.
I believe this is my popular film. But yeah, it was kind of I knew known as kind of it's very embraced by the Marxist community, and it's like a very political film. And I was really excited to find out it's set in Newcastle because that's where I'm residing at the moment. So yeah,
Yeah.
felt like home, felt nice and warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, and it's also a big deal in terms of, post mining living conditions and what it's like to live in the working class in the north after like years of neoliberalism. So yeah,
Definitely.
Newcastle's a really important setting.
I think one perhaps slightly controversial take that I can bring to this discussion is I know that different Marxists have very different relationships with the concept of anarchism. Some of them hate it, but then you have, anarcho-communist, right? I
Hmm.
do genuinely think this film has some anarcho tendencies. I found there was like a running theme of this film of just like people helping people as opposed to huge structures helping people.
Yeah, yeah.
You have it with um, Dave John's character, Daniel Blake, his backstory about nursing his wife. Uh, and there's a very implicit message that the NHS didn't do much to help and he was left on his own to deal with that. And then throughout the film, in various scenes, you see Daniel Blake through the process of trying to get the welfare he needs, be helped with the computer stuff at like the library and the neighbors, and then you've got the kind of the grassroots trainer selling thing
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they sell it for cheaper than it would be sold in a store, which is obviously a comment on like real value of things that are in production. Um, and yeah, and the whole relationship between Dave Jones and Haley Squires, the kind of trust in community in this film, as opposed to kind of huge institutions helping the people, like really depersonalized and cold. Um, the only part where the motif falls apart in that a tad bit is the prostitute storyline, which to deal with thematically is a lot more complex of an issue. But even then, I think that could be attributed to like the system they're fundamentally in, which leads to like seedy stuff like this happening.
Hmm.
And the guy who got her into it, I think he was genuinely trying to help, and in many ways he did, as tragic as it is.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take. It's better in terms of the guy actually wanting to be of some help.
Yeah,
Um,
like this idea that the best help you can possibly get is something that possibly demeaning. Um, but even the government isn't going to do anything more for you than that.
yeah,
They're not even going to give you the choice to get out of your situation. At the start of this film, to get onto my actual opinion, at the start, I was a bit worried because I'm weary of kind of like biopics and political dramas, which kind of you go into it knowing that it wants to win you on a topic. So it wants to convince you that a singer is amazing, it wants to convince you that a political stance is correct. And
mm,
like even when I'm in line of the politics, like I agree with the politics of this film. My fear was that it would rely too much on you already agreeing with the film to not convince you through, or to not be compelling as a narrative through cinema. And for the first half, I was a bit unsure because there was some dialogue moments where, like when he's talking to the tax, sorry, I can't remember, I don't know the specific names for everything. When he's at the job center
yeah,
and he's like commenting on how silly the system is. Uh, I was a bit worried. I was like, okay, is this a bit too heavy-handed? Like, could this have been done in a more subtle way? But the second half of the film, I mean, not even the second half, like that was only the first 15 or so minutes. Like pretty quickly, I was rest assured with Hayley Squires and David Jones' performances being as good as they are. I really just enjoy being around these characters, and it really worked as like a movie on its own, and not just as like a political kind of
Yeah.
statement. And I think I really value how much care this took in creating likable and nuanced characters. Like I really think Hayley Squires is the heart and soul of this movie. Her performance is generally so gut wrenching, and it really made the political points of the film visceral. You know, as opposed to just kind of like plainly stated. Like of course there's a problem. Watching her, like for example, eat the baked beans, the way she does it, it's there's so much
Uh,
shame in her performance, but you completely understand it. It was I was really quite blown away from it. I was really quite moved by it.
it's a career-making performance, and it's so early in her career. Like,
Yeah, I haven't seen her in
she's
anything else.
astonishingly good. Talk about that for those first 20 minutes before I get into the bulk of like my thoughts on the film. I think I do see what you mean. It is quite heavy-handed, but I almost don't. I feel that it's quite a good way of setting up that, or not second half, but the rest of the film, because not only does it establish like the society they're living in, because there probably are a lot of people that aren't familiar with this very specific situation. This is like, I think capitalism is a global disease, but capitalism takes a lot of different forms in a lot of different nations. I think it does an incredible job of portraying the realism of this issue. Like, I think it's I get so much out of those first 20 minutes in just seeing how unbelievably corrupt the system is in a way. Like it's almost like true crime in a way. It's so shocking that it's entertaining. I'm watching it and I cannot believe that this is actually what's going on. And this film is incredibly accurate. This film, there is nothing in this film like there are a multitude of articles about this, um, but this film is real life for so many people. This is the current state of affairs, and I think just seeing that executed, especially with like Dave Jones's performance already in the first like 15 minutes of the movie being so like strong and characterful, I kind of made it through that stuff. And like
You know what this
yeah,
film reminded me of?
mm.
Shin Godzilla.
Yeah, yeah.
I think
Honestly,
there was lots of dark, well, comedy of manners, I believe is what it's uh, dealing with bureaucracy and kind of I thought it was funny in terms of how ridiculous is this, the recurring the decision maker will get back to you and
yeah,
how
yeah. The
like it
stuff on the
felt
phone is almost
yeah.
is pretty much definitely
And the
intentionally
brilliant
comedic.
punchline where you have it set up in the first act of the crappy phone music, and then at the end when you get the I Daniel Blake graffiti scene, you get the and change the shite music. It's like there is an underpinning of comedy of manners here, which yeah, evokes how laughable this system, is.
Yeah, I think that that's ultimately what's most shocking, um, is the fact that we can laugh at a system like this. Like watching this, it didn't, I'm very economically privileged. I've never, I mean, I'm a child. I live at home. I haven't had to, worry about like where I'm gonna live or anything like that. But I'd be very surprised to find myself in such a position like this. So while it's geographically very close to home, um, I find it very like hard to relate to these struggles. And so when you see these scenes of them talking to people in the government, it's genuinely dystopian for me. It's genuinely like seeing another side of society, that I knew was there, but seeing it so honestly portrayed is honestly so terrifying to me. Just the fear of it, like how miserable everything is, how difficult everything is, how a whole generation of people, like Daniel Blake's generation, is being left behind by automation. It's horrifying. It does genuinely feel like we're entering a technological dystopia brought on by unchecked capitalism, which is unchecked being in capitalism's nature. Some people may question, well, how many people can this actually have effect? Like surely there can't be this many people struggling in today's society. Um, and there are any number of statistics that are just outwardly appalling. Once you hear them, um, I haven't said this already. Apologies. But this is a spoiler discussion, um, and yeah, I'm just gonna get into the bulk of my thoughts now, because I realise I haven't actually said that properly yet. Um, I think this film is timeless, and I think this film is one of the most important films of the past 10 years. I think the recognition that it's got is so crucial, and but I am upset it's not gone further in defeating capitalism because, like I said, there are some people who think that this kind of thing is isn't frequent, isn't commonplace, um, and that 100,000 people that have been killed as a result of Tory austerity is in complete contradiction with that fact, and that's a conservative estimate, as in 100,000 people is on the low chance of the number of people that have been affected mortally.
To quote Marilyn Manson, one death is a tragedy, but millions of deaths is a statistic. And I think we need to be more empathetic. Not we, like you and I, but I think as a whole, as a society, we need to be more empathetic of like, it shouldn't take this happening to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people for people to care,
Yeah,
if that makes
yeah.
sense.
No, and exactly. But it's unfortunately
I understand that
the
that's
way.
kind of what you have to resort to, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I do see what you mean, but it's distressing that it is that way. Because really, and I don't want to I don't want to sound like I'm gonna I just think the internet's the worst thing ever. Because I think the internet has done a lot of good in some ways, but I think the internet has done a lot for dissociating people from like real life events. And I think that's something that like you said, like it does take in those shocking numbers, for it to feel like something of weight. And something this film does do well is taking the death of one person and making it so unbelievably shocking and miserable. Um, and but ultimately, Daniel Blake is a representative for that 100,000, that conservative estimate of 100,000, because there are too many people in poverty right now for that number to be that low. These are desperate, desperate times, and this film is so important in bringing attention to that. Like, yeah, we need more people like Ken Loach in film. We need more people like him who are um, unafraid to tell real life stories, and this is why I'm so upset when people, not cartoonishly, but people want films to be so apolitical. They want films to like what they want to see all the time, because this is the reality we're facing, and if we're not facing it in media, if we're not facing it in art, then we're not going to face up to it at all. These things have to be publicized before they can be recognized, and it's so upsetting to me.
I agree with you. And to get kind of back to the film, if I'm honest, the storyline that resonated with me the most was, yeah, Haley Squire story. That hit the closest to home for me because personally, like obviously I can't get too personal because these are private people's lives, but I have people in my family who are pretty much literally her character and have gone through exactly this stuff. And where her storyline goes, it isn't this absurdly tragic, pessimistic kind of situation. It's a very like realistic situation that I've seen people go through. And I think that really hits home to what you were saying about how which just made something that is timeless and timely. It should be acknowledged.
Yeah, I do agree with you actually. The stuff that I did find the most emotionally poignant, as opposed to Daniel Blake's stuff in the film, which I did find more politically poignant. Obviously, you care about his character so much, um, but it is very it's portrayed a lot more coldly, I would say. As like a cold struggle, whereas um, yeah, when you have this character who's moved from London up to Newcastle, it's a new strange city. She essentially uh, isn't able to sign on because she missed her appointment. And even though it's totally logical that she could just replace the person next in line, just do it quickly and get her benefits that she needs, they don't let her and they make her wait for her next appointment. And again, this might sound trivial to people, that she might just have to wait a few weeks before she can receive her money, but this can be a death sentence for people. In the one of the most subtly emotionally poignant scenes I found was Daniel is round for dinner with her character and her two children, and she gives Dan a meal and her children a meal, but she doesn't have the money to feed herself. Um, and like she essentially insists that Dan eats. Um, and again, it is like this communal like need. Like she's putting like her fellow person above her financial requirements.
Hi.
And it's so powerful. Um, and like honestly, that moment brought me to tears because like I said, this film's a microcosm, and it does just make me think about the the thousands, the hundreds of thousands of mothers that are probably doing the exact same right now. And I think that's why I find this film is interesting for me. It works so well as its own story. It really does. But honestly, what I do get most out of it is connecting the story it tells. I mean, it's not even intentional. I inevitably end up connecting the story it tells to the real world, because it is so upsetting that this is happening. It is so shocking that this is continuing in our society. There'll never be any justice in the world until this is fixed. And the only way this is fixed is the end of capitalism. And that's what this movie's trying to get across. Um, Josh, you have something you want to bring up?
Yeah, well, I think this kind of leads on perfectly from what you were just saying. When we, okay, so a lot of this film, I do generally really like this film. I thought it was a really good film, and obviously there's lots of like political points that resonates with both of us, and we both found like emotionally evocative.
Mm,
And I just want to like ask you, like, as like almost like an aesthetics question, how do we judge our which whose goal is to make you think about a political issue
yeah.
as opposed to say a film like I don't know La La Land, which politically is rather inept, but its goal is to like be aesthetically impressive, right? Uh, Sorry for that
Basically,
small shot at La La Land, but yeah,
no,
like
no, no.
do we
It's cool.
hold films like this to the same standard of like interesting cinematography and dialogue and you know the kind of the
Oh,
general rubric of how people generally judge films.
I think about this a lot, and I do actually have like an answer that I apply to like everything I watch, and I think it's that every film has a different goal. Whether you're trying to be political, whether you're trying to scare people, whether you're trying to make people laugh, ultimately everything has a different goal, and every film has a different method of achieving that goal. Like this film is very grey. The cinematography is genuinely flat. It is objectively like a flatly shot movie, but there's something, but it works for it. It works for the film. Like whereas like if a horror movie was shot this same way, I mean, it would depend on the horror movie. Um, like I genuinely I think there is no metric upon which, like, universal metric upon which films can be judged. And I know that's not what your question is implying, but I think that essentially every film is trying to achieve something so different from each other. Um, as long as you're essentially telling a story or trying to provide someone with an experience, it's ultimately up to the director to decide what they believe is the best method of executing their vision. And in this film, Ken Loach's his intention is political, and but he also writes a compelling story to deliver that political message. The best way to deliver this political message is with a very grounded, realist approach, and naturalistic as well, in which he essentially just puts real life onto film because real life is so shocking. I think that like the flat cinematography of it is part of that. Like there's so many different things that are a part of that. The performances are a part of that. Yeah, it's really long-winded.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I think it definitely works for this film. I wouldn't really call the cinematography flat. Like I didn't think it was poorly shot. There were some shots that were really memorable, like when Daniel Blake made the graffiti art, and it's a great shot of him like in the center of the frame, and then the huge writing sprawling above him, and it kind of that was really evocative.
I think what I mean by flatly shot is essentially Ken Loach uses the scenery to speak for
Yeah.
itself. I think he uses very minimalist like
Hmm.
shots that like for example the shot you spoke about like it's great in that it's so simple and like flat is has no negative connotations, but it's just a very like square shot of this scenery, and it's all part of that naturalistic style where he's essentially adding nothing to it. He's just showing you the most honest and powerful representation of what's happening.
I think he doesn't want
Um,
you to be distracted by like flashy cinematography. That's all.
yeah, and it's just very like it's just a very honest portrayal
I think.
of this world, this environment he's created.
Well, I think in assessing a film like this and thinking about how we judge the filmmaking, I think if the filmmaking adequately assists the message in a meaningful way, then it's kind of done its job. So the
Mm,
example of this film doing that quite well was, I think, the use of sound design. Like whenever we're at the job center place, um, you can hear in the background lots of conversations, which could be their own stories. But you know, it all kind of blurs. You know, you can't really make anything out. But there's obviously lots of people there who are very upset,
mm,
and you know, this really definitely relays the kind of there's this effect of this barrage of sound when you go to the job center thing, which suggests that this is affecting many people. But not only that, the kind of how it's all blurred together, none of it's distinct, kind of lets us know how perhaps the people working at the job center kind of view this. There's no kind of emotional investment or attachment to any of these people. It's just like a blur of poor people yelling at you, and it's and I think that kind of that what he's getting across with that is how disassociative the system is to the actual problems of people suffering underneath it. So stuff like that was great moments of Ken Loach using filmmaking
mm.
techniques to get across this point in subtle ways.
I think this definitely touches on the things you were saying earlier about the person to person relations, because ultimately one of the best Marxist themes that Ken Loach covers with this film is alienation, especially alienation from like your common person. Um, and I think this is why the person to person relations are so effective in this film. Um, alienation essentially comes from the relation of you to your surroundings through a financial incentive essentially, and this can be through relation to your means of production, to the product of your labor, to your fellow person, to your fellow worker, whatever. um, and yeah, the people at this job center who work at this job center um, are being made to relate to their fellow person through money. It's their job to do this. If they do not do their job, then they are then they are punished and they may lose their job. It's the same, and it works the other way. If Daniel Blake does not do as he is told, then he is financially punished for that. Um, and ultimately, what that does is create the most damning statement of the system we live in. Because essentially, if the current system punishes people for uh, punishes people for being empathetic. For example, he in one scene, Daniel Blake is helped by a job centre member of staff for which she is reprimanded by her manager. Um, and what this is essentially saying is that this system rewards being cold and distant from people and punishes being compassionate and ultimately punishes doing the exact thing that that job center for is there for, which is to help people. But in reality, that job center is not there to help people. That job center is there to placate people. It is there to do the bare minimum. It is there to do the bare minimum to stop people from noticing the shit that is going on. And that's essentially how everything in our system functions. It is there to do just enough that you survive, just enough that you can get by. So you don't do what Daniel Blake does, which is act outside of the system, spray paint the walls, to quote fucking Black Flag, appropriately. Like, yeah, and in taking, I think that I think that's so shocking. I think that the film being able to honestly tackle a key tenet of Marxism and have it just be totally accurate to today's society shows like the need for massive revolutionary change. It's terrifying that it's gone this far. um Watching this film, it's so slow, but it's honestly one of the slowest but most scary films I've ever seen. It's never made me a film has never pushed me this urgently towards wanting change more than I already did. It's terrifying.
Yeah, and I think the film definitely like communicates that with the recurring kind of the part its neighbor says, "Oh yeah, it's meant to be really annoying and difficult because they want you to stop trying." And I've seen lots of my friends just kind of give up like halfway through the process. Um,
Yeah.
so definitely like I definitely kind of the perhaps perceived slowness of the film is really getting across the arduous kind of process.
And just, yeah, exactly. Like how slow and painful it is to live in this system that's supposed to reward like being like daring and bold, when really for so many it is just this arbitrary slog for survival.
Yeah,
Like,
there's a great part of how just idiotic it is. There's that great section when they tell him he has to be applying for jobs so that he can get the thing he wants. So he applies for jobs, and again that person to person dynamic. It's very embarrassing for him to explain to the job person he can't actually work because he's medically unable to, but he's not being recognized as such, and he's just going through this like jumping through this hoop. And there's like the person kind of shouts him on the phone, and you can like understand the frustration of the person. Like it's not unfair to be upset that you worked hard reading your CV only to realize it was kind of
mm,
pointless. And then he goes back to the job thing, and he has like quote unquote no proof that he actually did any of this. Like it's a farce. It's farcical.
yeah, exactly. Like, it just perfectly illustrates how like such a corrupt system inherently turns people against each other. Like so many scenes in this film are about like conflict between people, like how, I mean, ultimately it's resolved, but the shoplifting scene, that essentially, like, the shop manager could choose to take that personally. The shop manager could choose to reprimand her himself and yell at her, or like much as the guy that offers Daniel a job when he's looking for one. It inherent this system is inherently turning people against each other. Um, it's so dystopian. It's so shockingly dystopian. Um, how desperate every situation is for everyone in this film. And again, this is real. This is the day to day for so many. Um, and it's and like this stress and this difficulty that Dan finds is ultimately his downfall. It's his death. Um, this film almost feels it almost feels like a Greek tragedy in how inevitable everything is. Dan having the fatal flaw of essentially not giving up, not taking the easy way out. Which is shocking that such a story could be so inevitable. Someone's demise could be caused to be so inevitable by such a flawed system.
Yeah, as the film comes to a close, the way they shoot Dave Jones, it becomes more and more Spectre-like. Like I love the scene when the young girl's looking through the post
Yeah.
box and you can't see anything, and then you kind of see Daniel Blake walking slowly in his gown, gradually coming to the thing. It's a dead man walking.
Yeah, you can see he's just falling apart. But yeah, this film is ultimately the most convincing way you can get people to grips with the situation because it is just so honest. It's so it's so political. It's so political, but it is so neutral. And I think that's ultimately the point is that if you look at this situation neutrally, you have no other choice but to be appalled. And that's what this film is. This film is a neutral look at this situation from the people that are causing to be suffered by it. Like, and if that's the only logical or not, no, not logical. If that's the only emotional conclusion you can come to as a result of watching this film, that it's appalling that this could happen to anyone, that it's ridiculous that bureaucracy can be allowed to be taken this far and be in fact rewarded by the system itself in the financial gain it provides. If that's the only emotional conclusion that you can come to, then that's ultimately the most damning statement on capitalism itself. This film inherently deconstructs capitalism.
Strong words.
I think people very, very often boil down politics to a logical standpoint, to a neutral standpoint, which I do think is ridiculous. I don't think you can look at a situation impartially, which is why like centrist perspectives are also I ridicule them so much because the idea that you can look at a situation neutrally as a person is ridiculous. But what you can choose to do is you can choose to take honest perspectives. You can be honest about the perspective you are showing. This film is very honest about the fact that it is showing the plight of the worker under capitalism. But the fact that it's so honest in that allows it to tell the story so convincingly. And that's ultimately the most damning part of it. So while I do think you can portray certain perspectives honestly, I think the idea of politics as a logical science is flawed. I mean, I'm a Marxist, and Marxism is a science, but there's also in the community that follows Marxism, there is a lot of emotional discussion on themes of justice and equality, which ultimately come from emotional places. We want we Marxists, we want these things because we believe that is the ultimate way that everyone will be happiest. That is the ultimate way that we can live society as fairly and as equally as possible. Socialism is what we want because we emotionally care about other people. Boiling politics down to science and logic, as so much of the right does, is just ridiculous to me. humans are inherently emotional creatures. Um, so the idea that we can take the running of our society, the way we structure our society, and turn it into something that we're just inherently not, is ridiculous to me. So yeah, political rant over. Um, yeah, I guess we can go into our closing thoughts on I, Daniel Blake.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it all. Overall, I'd give this a pretty decent to strong recommend. I think it's a really good film. I think despite kind of how we brought up some of the slowness, I don't really think this film ever felt boring or tedious.
Not at all. Yeah.
And it was very entertaining to watch and very warm. There's a great warmth to this film. It wasn't angry. It's obviously Ken Loach is very angry. Yeah, no, it doesn't feel dispassionate. It feels passionate in a way that's not just angry, it's compassionate. And the characters are very well rounded and likable. Like there's three lovely scenes, like when they're talking to their Chinese friend on Skype, uh, which is a
About
really funny
football.
scene. Yeah,
Yeah.
about football.
So
Um,
human. So
and
beautiful.
My concluding thought is this film, even though it's so grounded in realism, there is great use of metaphor. Yeah, so the great use of metaphor is when Dave Johns is talking to the young boy, and it's like, what kills men more, sharks or coconuts? And eventually the boy replies, coconuts. And I think the way I interpreted that was sharks is how you'd think of kind of people who blame welfare scroungers for how they die. It's like they think of them as kind of untrustworthy, criminal, lazy sharks, right? Whereas coconut is this kind of perfectly round, should be functional. It's the system. And ultimately, the capitalist government, kills more people than quote unquote sharks, like actual people do. So that's the way I interpreted that back and forth. Yeah, I just saw that as I thought it's emblematic of how good the film is at both being very realistic, but also working on levels of like metaphor and conveying point of view. And I strongly recommend it. I think everyone should check this out, honestly.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think this is a film everyone should watch. I do legitimately see this as one of the most important films of the 21st century so far. In how when you watch this film, this is such an honest portrayal of the class struggle in the 21st century. If you watching this film uh, open-mindedly is like a litmus test of your political standing, and I think there's not many other films you can say that about so honestly. This is I keep using this word honest, and I'm going to use it again because it's so honestly representative of today. And if you can watch such an honest representation of today and come to your own conclusion, that's what makes this film so powerful. Is you can come to your own conclusion about it, but I think that conclusion will all pretty much always line up with the film's message. If you come to it with an open mind, I find it very hard to think if someone comes to this film empathetically that they're not convinced by its message, which is why I think it's so important. Yeah, I really like the way you talked about that metaphor. The way I interpreted it was quite similar. It's kind of like the shark could be like what you think state oppression looks like. You know, state oppression can seem like this big menacing thing, but really, it kind of comes to you like in this harmless package. It comes to you in the job center, in that kind of thing, like the coconut being the job center. Like, wow, that's a funny sentence. But it's you can't. Yeah, it comes to you as like something you could perceive as harmless, something you could perceive as something that's there to even help you. But ultimately, what it actually represents is failure and like a threat. So yeah, that's the way I saw it.
Yeah, I like your interpretation a lot more than mine. I'm gonna adapt to that.
Adopt that.
Yeah, and also like the sense of a shark is personal, it's out to get you, and the big thing in the film. Well, sharks are lovely and they don't kill that many people, but
Yeah, we
anyway,
on this podcast we are pro shark.
like you were saying, there's like a predatory image of shark, and that's where you think of authoritarian governments, which are like scary. But there's coconuts. It's completely impersonal. It's not one person actively opposed to another person. It just happens.
Exactly. A shark goes out of its way to inflict harm, whereas the accidental death of a coconut is just a result of nature. It's just a result of the system being allowed to continue as it is, which is capitalism. Capitalism just is allowed to run rampant, to do whatever, no matter what the cost to humanity. And that's why the death toll to the coconut is so much higher than to the shark. Um, that being capitalism versus this uh, shapeless predatory attack on the worker. Yeah, and that's ultimately what the film is about. It's ultimately about not allowing this to continue by purely showing you its detrimental consequences to people on an emotional level, and that's the most important part. This is an emotionally based film, as all politics should be, because we are emotional people and our society should be governed that way as well. So yeah, I cannot recommend this film enough. Um, Even as enjoyable as it is, like I do just on a personal level, I enjoy watching this film, but I recommend it uh, even more strongly as a political statement on the 21st century and on capitalism. If any of those things interest you, whether you're for capitalism, whether you're against capitalism, which you should be after you watch this film, you should watch this because you will get something out of it, even if you hate it. So, yeah. Josh, do you have anything else you want to say about I, Daniel Blake?
Uh, my friend in Newcastle, who his parents run a restaurant, and Dave Johns, I should say, once came into the restaurant as
Whoa.
he's about town, and my friend's mum thought that he was Daniel Craig and made James Bond jokes all night until someone eventually had to tell her that's
What?
actually not Daniel Craig. That's Dave Johns.
The opposite. Daniel Craig is what capitalism wants you to think the average English person is. Dave Johns, like his character in Daniel Blake, is what English culture is what English capitalism creates. That's so fucking hilarious.
That's a true story. That's my final
That's
thoughts on that, Daniel Blake.
that's actually shameful. Okay. All right, I think we're good on Daniel Blake. So yeah, please, please, please give it a watch. It's so important. It won the Palme d'Or for a reason. Okay, now that we've wrapped up our I, Daniel Blake discussion, we will move on to our discussion of Only You. Um, this is a film, I believe, the directorial debut of Harry Wootliff. Wootliff, the debut feature of Harry Wootliff, who is a female director. Um, Only You is a film about a 36, 35 year old woman who falls in love with a 26-year-old man. The point of the movie is not their age gap. It plays a part in their relationship, but that's not the point of the movie. This is simply a film about their relationship and about relationships as a whole, and like how they function essentially, and how we relate to people um, within a relationship. It's very, again, it's quite grounded and realist, quite similar to Only You. It's also got a northern connection, as Josh helpfully pointed out. But we spent about the first half an hour trying to figure out where it was set. Which I think is kind of interesting. I do think it's interesting how focused this movie is on the couple, which almost could be a comment itself on how wrapped up in relationships you get. But anyway, I'll stop this scatterbrained introduction. I'll start off with my thoughts on the film. To be honest, it's a bit of a first for the Minority Arts Appreciation Society podcast. Um, I don't have a whole lot to say about this movie. I thought it was fine. I thought it was fine. I'm gonna be quite blunt with this one. I was pretty into it after the first 10 minutes. Once the sort of premise set in, which they'd sort of had their introduction, they'd met. Um, but I think kind of where it fell flat for me was I didn't really like the characters all that much. I didn't dislike them, but other than seeing how honestly that I need to stop saying honestly. I said that way too many times in the last discussion.
Honestly,
Honestly,
the
very
American
very
football
appropriate
song.
song choice for this film actually. Um,
Oh, I wish I
like
was listening to that album instead.
oh whoa. Sorry. Okay. So yeah, basically, I didn't think they were bad. I just didn't think they were particularly interesting people. And the only interesting character stuff I got from it was how realistically it depicts being completely enamored with someone. Which there are some legitimately great moments, like especially when they first start going out. There's like it really there was one particular moment that just hit me with just how like shockingly well it portrayed like those first few weeks of being with someone when you are just completely enamored with them, um, and just how like electric and magical any physical contact with them is. So that stuff worked well for me. I'm gonna ask Josh what he thinks because after that little dig, I'm really curious.
All right. So I think it's cool that there's an IVF film out there. I've never really seen much time devoted to this topic in cinema, and I think it's great to see it explored here. But quite
Oh,
frankly,
I know where you're coming at this from.
I found this film rather quite dull. Outside of some occasionally stirring and realistic performances, the whole film hinges on conflicts that aren't entirely convincing. And while it does explore a lesser explored issue in cinema, it does not carry it out in a way that's satisfyingly contemplative, introspective, or subversive. There are so many opportunities to delve into themes that would tie into the central conceit of the film, but it really misses all of these and it very faintly brushes over even discussing any of them.
Can I
And
ask you something?
yeah, it's a
Are
rather
you,
drab affair. But yeah, ask me the question you want to ask.
are you talking about the like IVF conflict as a whole?
Okay, so in a film like this, right, it's dealing with the emotional damage of being unable to have a child, right? And here, this is literally a Pandora's box of so many interesting stuff you can go into. What does it mean
Mm,
to be a woman? Why do you have a desire to have children? What does children bring to our relationships? What does relationships mean outside of children? Or
yeah.
do children give purpose or fulfillment to relationship? This film, in my opinion, there's no self-awareness whatsoever. There's no introspection. It doesn't consider any of these quandaries that come with the conflict of being sterile. It just
See,
presents a very raw emotional reaction to it, which maybe if the characters were more interesting, I'd care about more. Like, okay, if this was my friend who was having this struggle, yeah, I'd be pretty invested. But this is a film; these are characters, and you need to construct interesting characters. I'm not just gonna care because objectively this is a sad thing to happen to someone. Like, you need to explore it in
mm,
interesting ways.
see, this is interesting because what you've just said, um, I took that to such an extreme in that they explored it so little. Was that I in that they explored the IVF struggle so little. I genuinely just viewed it as a plot device to force them into emotional conflict. That's how little I feel like the film valued that entire conflict. I really do think that, which I think is a flaw, not in terms of morally. I think as a storytelling tool, it was really weak the way they um, essentially just propped up. um yeah, this like entire plight for pregnancy to be the like inciting incident in a way, and to force their relationship through a bit more of a rough patch. Um, and I think that's the thing, is that I think it almost, that conflict of wanting to have children replaced fleshing their characters out. I really felt like it came at a pivotal moment where I was ready to be like ready to like grow to like their characters more, but instead we were posed with the conflict so early. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, well, this film's presentation is so sloppy and unthoughtful. It's almost impossible to get invested in a character's lives. For example,
Yeah,
this film does not communicate time passing well at all, and I refuse to believe this is an artful choice because, like, a few minutes, like around 20 minutes in the film, they're like, "Oh, we should have a baby," and I'm like, "Wait a minute! I swear they just met like a week ago," and it's heavily implied that they've been together for like a year at a certain point. And I'm like, when did this time lapse happen? Like, it does a really poor job at showing time changing. If you want to be super realistic, just have some lines in the background and dialogue of like, "Oh, this is happening now." Or maybe, I don't know, have characters of chemistry with each other, so actually feel like, oh yeah, they get to know each other more now. They're closer. I felt no sense of like time or place or
yeah,
even personality throughout most of this film, and these are deeply, deeply, deeply boring people. I can't stress how boring this couple is. Like, there's when the conflict comes up, like I can't have a child. That's an interesting conflict, you know. That's like a pretty people go through that. But the way they deal with it, it's like, oh well, I guess we gotta shout at each other now, you know. I'm gonna say really weird and mean stuff to you that have never shown any tendencies in my character to say things like this before.
yeah.
I,
They just suddenly become abusive,
so
toxic people every time they
yeah,
have an argument. It's ridiculous.
it's so contrived.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
fucking hell. They didn't have a
It's not.
yeah.
It's
Yeah, go on.
in contrast to like, I like in contrast to something like Midsummer, which is a, I know it's a weird comparison, but the way that film shows abuse is, it's so incredibly accurate. In that it's not these moments of like rage and anger. It's like this consistent undermining of everything that you are and everything that you feel.
Mm.
Which obviously abuse can take a very explosive form. But what this film gets so wrong is about that kind of thing is just how inconsistently it writes its characters. And I don't think it's trying to tackle abuse. I just think it's written its characters so inconsistently that every time they have an argument, they turn into the most horrible people I've ever seen. Um, oh my god, it's written by the director, who is a woman. But honestly, it felt fucking misogynistic how awful the female character became every time they got into an argument. She would like
Completely agree.
she would beg the male character to like undermine her, and it really really didn't feel like a comment on how on like on womanhood and how she wants to be seen by a male. It really really just felt like this completely like awful stereotypical depiction of like, the like a, I can't think of the right word, but like a woman who flights between being really happy and like then like really mean and digging. Like yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy.
And in terms of dealing with its central theme, let's think about this film
Mhm.
from like a personal, I want to relate to the character's point of view. It reminds me of a film called Juno in a way, where I do like the film Juno, but the most annoying thing about that film is they do not discuss the option of abortion. It's kind of hand waved in the first 10 minutes and then it just moves on. And I feel similarly about the film. They do not seriously discuss any alternatives. We could adopt, uh, which is a big alternative, right? We could just not have a kid. What would that relationship look like? They don't seriously contemplate anything else, and it just makes the characters feel really emotionally immature and dull. Um, and back to what I was saying about Contrived, like I'm going to bring up my favorite film series again, the Before series by Richard Linklater.
Mm.
Before Midnight is basically the whole film is a married couple arguing for 40 minutes. That's the final scene of the film. They're trapped in a room together and they are arguing. And the conflict, like, but you completely understand both sides of the conflict. You completely appreciate both sides. It doesn't, but it's not as simple as we disagree, therefore we are arguing. It's more nuanced. It's like, I wish you'd be more emotionally intuitive about this, or I wish you were more open about that before. It's these little tiny nuggets of tension laid in
Mm.
the first act that explode in the third act, and it's all there. Whereas in this film, it's literally can't have baby. I am sad. Oh,
Yeah.
that's okay, honey. I love you anyway, and
Or
then
like,
explosion of anger, and then he explodes in anger, and it's just so contrived. Contrived is
yeah.
the only word I can think of to describe this movie.
Yeah, like she'll be like, "Well, I want to do this thing. No, you shouldn't do that thing. Like I I want to give your dad back money. No, dad don't want back money. Rah!
Yeah, it's really
So
weird.
boring. That's so boring. I don't
Yeah.
fucking care if you don't
Yeah.
want to give your dad back the money, and neither should you. If this was a real fucking relationship and you started yelling over each other over whether or not you should pay your dad back, that's fucking awful.
And I said this while watching the film. If you've been with someone for a year and you borrow money from their dad to do IVF, you don't have to confirm to your partner. You just call the dad. At this point, you must at least be able to just talk to the dad about, do you want the money back? Adults, adults do not act like this.
No, not at all. Not at all. Especially since the whole point of the film is that the relationship is moving faster than most relationships.
Mm.
That's the whole point of this film, is that they are so enraptured with each other that the relationship progresses immediately
I don't know.
quickly.
Do you feel the love?
Um, okay. See, I think this is almost an inherent problem with the film. Maybe if they were more interesting people, this wouldn't be so bad. But I think the sheer fact that they fall in love so completely, so quickly, is kind of a is it works to the film's detriment because you don't you don't get to see them learn to be with each other. You don't get to see that, and that's like one of the most like I like that's lovely to learn like how to love someone. I think is such a wonderful experience. Whereas as an audience, you don't get to experience that. That they have a one night stand, and then she sees him again, and then they're like, okay, we're moving in together, and you're like, what? Okay, they had a really nice cuddle. Like, there's that really nice fucking cuddle really early on when, like, she's like, I think he's lying on her lap. I was like, yes, that is gorgeous. That is exactly what it's like in the first, like, bit of a relationship. Please continue like this. Please being this realistic. And then they're like, nah, bruh, they're moving in together. They want a child. I'm like, what? What?
It
How am I supposed to care about that? I don't know. I think as well, like one massive thing is like when she tells her friend that she's moving in with him, it's delivered like it's kind of played for comedy, like like oh like her friend also like, oh, so you guys getting pretty serious then? And she's like, oh yeah, we're moving in together next week, kind of thing. And it's like a little bit comedic, but it's also just like, okay, well, that removes any emotional weight that massive emotional decision had. Like, what? How are we supposed to care about that now when you deliver it as like just this completely nonchalant thing? Like, this film essentially blows its emotional load so fucking early that moving in together becomes uh becomes irrelevant. It becomes like nonchalant. So much to the point that in this relationships, it seems the only emotional fulfillment they can get from each other is by having a child. Maybe you could stretch that's like intentional, like they're just driving that, they're just looking for one emotional milestone to another. But I really don't think that's the point. I really think you're meant to like view all of this as like wonderful and enrapturing when really it's like, what? How am I supposed to care when it just moves way too fast?
Yeah, and I think there are certain cinematic tropes that are important. For example, most good romance films have like a light bulb moment where one character realizes, oh, this other person's like really cool. And what I watched Blue Valentine recently, the Ryan Gosling film, and there's an excellent scene, involving the ukulele where she realizes that, oh, Ryan Gosling's a dreamy guy, and then most films have
He
this.
is dreamy.
And this one, I don't, maybe it's going for realism, but it reminds me of Twilight in the sense that you don't it takes until like Breaking Dawn Part One for you to actually understand why they like each other. The first one, there's no
No.
indication of why these people are so obsessed with each other, and this really reminds me of that. They're just two very dull people who just decide to be obsessed with each other. And
Yeah.
yeah, and if this one was meant to be a platform to talk about IVF, it fails miserably. There's a great film called Obvious Child. I want to do everything except talk about this movie. There's a great film called Obvious Child, which deals with abortion, and it's not like everything's at the abortion clinic, but it deals with that theme so well and so tenderly and so complexly.
It's
Um,
central to the story.
yeah, and I really cared by the end because they constructed really great characters outside of that point that the theme the film was dealing with was what is it like as a woman to go through abortion. Um, and this film just is so emotionally cold.
It's not it's like it's very emotionally warm, but it's almost pushes you further away because it's
I don't
failed
think
to
it was
make you
warm.
care. It's warm in like, look how lovely this is. Look how like, the camera work is so like quote unquote intimate and that kind of thing. But I think the fact that it fails to make you care makes it really cold. Like I think it's
Mm,
trying to be really warm and intimate,
mm. Yeah,
but you just feel so distant from these characters. Like, who are these people? What are they honestly about?
I think like the best thing about this film was probably the cinematography. Uh, there are some decent shots where, yeah, the camera work is quite intimate and the use of lighting is very
The
tender.
the shadows were really nice. Like,
Yeah,
there'd be these moments where they like
yeah.
it really like did genuinely make it feel intimate when the characters were lacking, because like you'd have these like characters shadows falling on each other, and that's just like a really like nice subtle like depiction of closeness. And it was, yeah, if the lighting was really low, sometimes it would get it like just right, and it'd be like, oh, that's quite a nice like framing kind of thing. But I do think do need those characters to make that work.
But it was,
um
yeah, it wasn't supported by the writing at all.
i
Like that, how intimate the cinematography was.
I think the performances were good. They were
Yeah,
trying.
I agree. I thought the actors did as good as they could have done with the script. I agree.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, they were trying really hard. These characters are genuinely like, I think the actors tried to introduce a bit of like in between. Do you know what I mean? From the like, we're so in love and I hate you. I think the characters did genuinely like try and
Mm,
introduce like some more, especially the lead male actor. I thought he was pretty great at like
mm.
doing like a bit more of just like subtle frustration. Um,
I
but
believe
then
his name
as
is
well,
Josh O'Connor,
yes,
known for his
yes.
role in Cinderella 2015.
What? The conflict towards the end of the film, when she's trying to get back together with him, for that bit, I thought that was really well performed by her. Like, you do genuinely feel like the weight of her being so impetuous, and then wanting to take him back. Wow, just saying that out loud just makes her sound like such an awfully misogynistically written character. Not awfully misogynistically, but like, a female character from like 50 years ago. Um,
Which is really weird because I think this film gets masculinity really right.
yeah, yeah.
Josh O'Connor like is very emotionally in tune with her and invested and doesn't get angry, and when it does, it doesn't really feel characteristic. It felt kind of forced. Um, like in terms of, I felt that was a mistake on the part of the writers. Like, there's a great conflict. Well, one of the bits where I understood a character was when she's taking a pregnancy test And he's like,
Mm.
okay, can you wait for me to get home because I want to be there? And she doesn't. And it's like, and he's upset, understandably, because it's very unfair. And because they're
Yeah,
both
and this
in this
is
together. And
it's like
he's,
the last ditch attempt as
yeah, he wants
well.
to be there to support her in it. And it just shows how it just really, it, again, yeah, it's misogynistic in the sense, it feels misogynistic in the sense that that scene plays off as she is selfish. She just wants a baby, like because she's scared that she won't be able to have children anymore. And it's not really about him; it's all about her in that moment. Like,
Yeah,
it's that she's not really considering his feelings going through this. He's
and
constantly aware of her and constantly considerate.
literally the reason she does that, the reason like like I was trying to say, this pregnancy test, it's pretty much the last. This is their last attempt at IVF, I believe. And this is the pregnancy test that will tell them if this last attempt has worked. Um, and so, yeah, naturally, he really wants to see it as well. And the main character does this is because he's going to be 2 hours later home, and it's because of traffic. Even though he's been like, they're going through a bit of a rough patch, but over text, he's been like really nice and sweet. He's like, I know we've had a rough bit, but I can't wait to see you. Please just wait till I'm home, and we'll do this together. And then he's like, sorry, just going to be 2 hours later home, traffic. And then she's like, "Rah! Gotta do the test, gotta do the test, because I'm a really badly written female character and I must be pregnant and I have to know."
Yeah,
Oh
it
my
kind of,
god.
yeah, like this is what I meant when I said it doesn't unwrap the themes that come with the idea of pregnancy and children and what that means and how that quote unquote makes you a woman. It reverts back to like 1930s Disney logic of like if you're not a wife and the mother, you're not a woman, you're pointless, you know? Like
Yeah.
it doesn't ever actually get introspective. It doesn't portray Costa's character as being immature in this sense. It's very sympathetic towards her in a way that wasn't deserving, or like she should have had a point of like, hey, I can be happy without being a mom because that happens to women sometimes. I don't know.
Another really bad thing is that her job, you literally don't know what her job is, whereas
Ah,
the male character is doing a PhD in like marine biology, which is fucking awesome. Like
so
that's so
specific.
fucking cool. Yeah, and it comes up in multiple scenes. There's a scene where he's away because of his job. Her job is a boring office job that like you're never told what it is. You're never told what it is. This is so bad. This is so regressive. It feels awful watching it. You don't understand why like obviously like you don't have to have like some grand reason to want to have a child, but I never get a sense of her character outside of like wanting to have a child.
Honestly,
Um
the film The Breakup did a better job at like
ah!
portraying a female character who has a life outside of the, but it really goes in depth in like her job and like it helps you know like what kind of person she is. I mean, she's Jennifer Aniston, but you know, I mean, even a film like that did a better. I feel like it cared more about its female. A Vince Vaughn film cared more about its female characters than this one. It felt at points like it was ridiculous.
Yeah, I was honestly originally gonna kind of praise this movie for that the lack of sense you get for these people outside of their relationship as like kind of accurate to like a very like enrapturing relationship. But then I remembered that, oh wait, yeah, you are given a real sense of this guy's life outside of her. You get a massive sense of his family, like you get to
Mm.
know his dad quite well. There's like an emotional scene with his father. um and then as well like his job and his career, whereas yeah, you just can't say the same thing about this female character. It's crazy. It's
It's very
crazy.
confusing because it is constructed as like an indie romance movie that should be good. Like the directing, I mean, the cinematography is
Cinematography is
good. It
good.
has that kind of artsy aesthetic. You feel like this should be like high-minded, you know.
i would
But the writing's so awful. It's honestly shocking.
I honestly thought that's what this movie would be. Like I genuinely thought it would be that good, and I would love to see these actors in that. I would love to see Only You 2 Electric Boogaloo, and it's just the same movie, but just like better written. Um, and with like the same cinematography
Mate, just
and
watch
all
the
that.
Before trilogy. Sorry.
Yeah, pretty much, man. Richard Linklater, my G. Oh man. And like, yeah. Oh, I wouldn't like to know this. The writer's stance on trans rights because oh, her
Well,
takes on what makes a woman is not fun.
yeah. I mean,
So
I had this comment like, this is a conflict that literally maybe like 75% of sexualities come across like, oh, we can't
yeah,
biologically reproduce. If that destroys your relationship, then I'm sorry, your relationship was not worth my place. Like, honestly.
exactly, exactly. Like this shouldn't be the problem that it is. Like this is very personal. I'm gonna talk about it anyway. Yeah. So if I ever want children, and I'm a lesbian, for context, it's gonna be like an interesting conflict. But I never ever see that being an issue. Like I could freeze my sperm now, I guess, or like get a sperm donor or adopt. There are so many things I could do that like I would rather do any of those three options like than have my relationship be seriously affected by it. Like I don't know. That I some I just feel like I value what I would have right in front of me before I value a hypothetical child. Like
I,
for like essentially what I'm saying is if any of those options was putting significant emotional weight on my relationship, I'd be like, okay, well, we don't really need to do this. Um, let's just take a step back and figure things out, which would just completely destroy the conflict of this movie. Maybe if they set up something wherein like it was very important to one of these two characters that they have children in the quote unquote old fashioned way. Like I don't know, one was fucking Catholic or something like that. Um, I could like kind of understand, but there's nothing like that. And this is something Josh was saying like throughout the movie was just adopt. Like it is that simple. Um,
or at least talk
yeah,
about it. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
It's not even brought up as an option. It's
Like,
not even an option.
another thing is that I thought maybe what would be redemptive is the film would end with them breaking up and like the realization that there's nothing in a relationship apart from the biological drive to want to have children, quote unquote, if you're like into Darwin and that. Uh, so yeah, if there was a moment where it's like, okay, oh yeah, we're kind of a boring couple and we're just like meat puppets, in a production line for babies. And now that we can't fulfill that purpose, there's no much reason to be together. If it ended there, like as a comment on like your relationship will break down if it's only kind of going through the motions like this, then okay, that could have been an interesting point to make. But
It
it
would have been
ends with this
redemptive.
it ends with
Yeah.
this really schmaltzy, optimistic them coming back together and like kissing, which implies that like the filmmakers think their relationship was worthwhile and interesting and not
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah. Even though the
Uh,
reason they broke up was because um she screeched at him to admit that if she can't have a child, he would have sex with someone else, which he then angrily yells at her, which is like, okay, if that ever happens with someone, you should never ever get back together with them. That is obviously a horrible toxic relationship. But no, just get back together. Everyone has rough patches. Sorry, like the scene where the father is like, me and your mum had rough patches all the time. There'd be days where she wouldn't talk to me. And I'm just here like, that's not okay! That's not okay! Like, you can't just not talk to your significant other for multiple days to punish them. That is emotional abuse. Like, why is this film so regressive? It's insane.
well, okay, I really want to talk about that scene when they scream at each other because I honestly don't understand the motivations of Josh O'Connor's character in that moment because he the only possible explanation I have is that she's screaming at him to say stuff, and he's like frustrated. So he's like, "I'm going to say this ridiculous, stupid stuff that you want to hear, so that you hear how ridiculous it sounds coming out of my mouth, and then hopefully, you realize that that was ridiculous." But it wasn't played like that totally, and I just don't really understand why he said those stuff. It just felt really jarring compared to what his character's like for the rest of the film.
Yeah,
Could you explain? Do you have a theory behind that?
I think the film is talking about like to some extent. I think it is tackling like how men argue in relationships, like how aggressive they can be, and things like that. It's kind of destroyed by how like poorly written the female character is in these arguments as well because she is so like horrible. But I do think there's like a legitimate sense of like him being overly aggressive and like masculine. I'm saying it's weak,
But
but I'm
again,
saying that's
I,
where it might
yeah,
be coming from.
and in that weakness, I've just got to direct our audience, our lovely audience, to the film Blue Valentine, in which Ryan Gosling plays that aggressive male character. And there are films where he's scary, legitimately scary. But it's not like, look at the scary man. It's like, look at the emotionally damaged and repressed man try to deal with a complex feeling through aggression. And it's like, it's very like, almost very like, Marlon Brando Street Kind of Desire-esque in how it portrays the scary, masculine way of dealing with relationship troubles through a way that's like you understand the man, and it's not justifiable, but it's nuanced, and you care about the characters still. It's not just like, oh, I guess this character is just going to be horrible for 10 minutes now. This is
I think
weird.
I think there's a limit, but I think like to what you can care about. But I think understanding the character
No,
is
it's not
always
about caring. It's about writing actual people. Like people aren't just
yeah,
meat
yeah,
puppets who are
okay,
like
okay.
really mean to fulfill this idea of like a vague political idea of what genders are like. Like people normally think they're the good guys, right? And when they act out, they in their head they're not being horrible. They're like trying really hard to connect or something, or they think they're in the right. And you can do shows like Mad Men, films like Blue Valentine do nuanced performances and nuanced writing that writes people where you understand where they're coming from, even if you disagree with them. Whereas this, it just comes out of nowhere, and it's not subtle, interesting. It's impossible to care about these people because they feel like meat puppets.
Yeah, and like I said, it doesn't show up well when like I hate the female character. I'm literally just calling the male character and the female character. The female character is so horrible as well. Like God, it's just so weird, isn't it? It's just so weirdly written. Um, but I think we should probably wrap it up there and get into our final thoughts because I think we could angrily talk about this for quite some time. Um, I don't hate this. I don't hate this. I've been quite harsh, but it does have some redeeming qualities. They're not consistent enough to make this worth a recommend, um, but they are there. I find, yeah, like I said, I find the way these characters are written kind of insufferable. But everything else is kind of there. But ultimately, when you're writing a film that's so centered around characters, if you are writing bad characters and bad conflict, then your film is going to fall apart. And that's what happened in this case. So while, yeah, it is nicely shot for the most part, I like, the intimacy of it and the acting is legitimately great regarding the sort with working with what they had. Um, Ultimately, this had to be a tight script. This had to be an emotionally gripping, well written script. Instead, it's 2 hours of forced conflict, boring people, and a bit like and unjustified sappiness, basically. And so for all those reasons, I can't recommend this film. So yeah, but yeah, Josh, what are your closing thoughts on Only You?
Yeah, I don't recommend this film. I think this is one of the most frustrating types of bad movies. I like to call it the art failure. It's the film that's like competently directed enough for you to think maybe this is watching and you sit through 2 hours of it. But after it's done, it robbed you of 2 hours of your life and was so bland and unmemorable. Like this isn't Suicide Squad, where at least I got some good memes out of it. This is like no, this is bereft. There's nothing I got out of this. It was dull. It was boring. Every variation of those two words, that's what it was. And yeah, okay, it was shot fine and had some good performances, but Jesus Christ, there's no reason anyone needs to watch this film, and it's just a time sink. It's just
Yeah.
a complete. I'm very disappointed by this movie, and yeah,
Mm.
I wouldn't recommend it.
I'm so disappointed. Watch the trailer after this. It's fucking great. It's fucking great. Um, the trailer like it kind of sets it up as like this like slow descent into like kind of a toxic relationship from this like incredibly impassioned beginning. Um, and like if that's what the film is going for, which we talked about, it does completely fail. Um, like yeah, watch the trailer. It makes it so frustrating as a film because it does look so great. So yeah, it is very frustrating. So just don't watch it, or if you have watched it, just move on because there's loads of other good stuff out there. Yeah, that about wraps it up for this episode in terms of film discussion. However, of course, Josh has some albums to recommend to suggest for the next episode.
So okay, so the albums we're discussing next week, I've the new albums. First of all, we're going to be talking about Bandana by Freddie Gibbs and Madlib, the new hip hop album, and then we'll be talking about Lingua Ignota's Caligula in all caps, which is a uh
I've heard it's quite something.
wait, I'm trying to remember the name of the genre. Awesome genre name, and I don't want to mess it up. It's one of the coolest. I think it's like dark. Oh, neoclassical dark wave. There we go.
Oh.
Oof, what a name. Uh, and then yeah, then we got Placebo, self-titled album, the debut from 1996. Why are you laughing?
Just the contrast.
Yeah, yeah. Alternative rock.
Neoclassical dark wave and the Placebo debut album.
Yeah, some 1996 alt rock.
Hell
Um,
yeah.
so,
Well,
or will
yeah.
it be hell yeah? Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, those are the albums for next week. So feel free to listen along, get interactive and all. And
I've already heard Bandana. I haven't heard Caligula yet, but it's been on my radar. Um, and was it me who recommended Placebo? Like, as in, who like told you it existed?
you and one of your friends got really into the Without You I'm Nothing album, I think, which is the most popular one. Like that's the one that it seems like those songs from that album were the ones that I heard in
No,
my
no, it's
socials. Was it the self-titled one?
it was self-titled.
Really? Okay. In my social circle, I only seem to hear songs about You I'm Nothing, the second
Ah.
one. Like, because obviously that's got the hit song, You Don't Care About Us and Pure Morning and
Mm-hmm.
every You, Every Me. I was actually that song actually played at the beginning of a film I watched recently.
Oh
Cruel
wow.
Intentions. There's a
Oh,
there's a great
sick.
there's like actually an amazing opening shot of the camera like dizzyingly flying over but suburbs and every you every
Mm-hmm.
me is playing. Anyway,
Mad.
so yeah, those are the albums.
Cool. All right. Well, I believe we've ticked all the boxes. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Matty,
Ivan Josh.
and yeah, we'll see you next week or in a week or two, 2 weeks, because that's when we release episodes.
We're
For
getting
our
better. We're getting
music
better.
episode, and that'll be our 10th episode as well. We've made it so far, so far. Um, so yeah, it should be great. See you then.
So, ta for now.